The direction of modern philosophy. 1. Descartes and modern philosophy. The birth of subjectivism. One of the cherished myths of the modern age is that there was a Copernican revolution which shifted the attention of European man from a man-centered perspective to a broader, universe-oriented worldview. Man no longer saw himself, we are told, as the center of the universe, and the earth as that point around which all things revolved, but saw instead the sun as the center. Man ostensibly shrank in size. Freud saw Copernicus, Darwin, and himself as the three men who had dealt destructive blows to man's soul. According to the myth, the Church bitterly attacked Copernicus. Thus, according to Andrew White's very influential work, Calvin took the lead in his commentary on Genesis by condemning all who asserted that the earth is not at the center of the universe. He clinched the matter by the usual reference to the first verse of the 93rd Psalm and asked, "Who will venture to place the authority of Copernicus above that of the Holy Spirit?" Unfortunately, White did not check his sources. Calvin apparently never even heard of Copernicus and made no reference to him. In fact, Calvin left the door open for theoretical freedom in astronomy by insisting in his commentary on Psalm 136:7, "The Holy Spirit had no intention to teach astronomy, and in proposing instruction meant to be common to the simplest and most uneducated persons, he made use by Moses and the other prophets of popular language, that none might shelter himself under the pretext of obscurity, as we will see men sometimes very readily pretend an incapacity to understand when anything deep or recondite is submitted to their notice." Luther was critical, but essentially disinterested in Copernicus, although a Lutheran minister supervised the printing of Copernicus's study and wrote the preface to it. Although Rome censured the book, it left the door open to better evidence on the subject. Copernicus's 1473 to 1543 theory was essentially a revision of Ptolemy, whose system Copernicus accepted, and was designed to simplify rather than to destroy the Ptolemaic conception. How much the so-called Copernican revolution has been a deduction of scholars rather than a fact of history appears in Will Durant's account of it. Note that Durant requires us to believe that men reacted as he feels they should have done, and concludes by effectually negating his thesis by stating that only a small minority in any generation would recognize the implications. When men stopped to ponder the implications of the new system, they must have wondered at the assumption that the creator of this immense and orderly cosmos had sent his son to die on this middling planet. All the lovely poetry of Christianity seemed to go up in smoke, as Goethe has put it, at the touch of the Polish clergyman. The heliocentric astronomy compelled men to reconceive God in less provincial, less anthropomorphic terms. It gave theology the strongest challenge in the history of religion. Hence, the Copernican revolution was far profounder than the Reformation. It made the differences between Catholic and Protestant dogmas seem trivial. It pointed beyond the Reformation to the Enlightenment, from Erasmus and Luther to Voltaire, and even beyond Voltaire to the pessimistic agnosticism of a 19th century that would add the Darwinian to the Copernican catastrophe. There was but one protection against such men, and that was only a small minority in any generation would recognize the implications of their thought. The sun will rise and set when Copernicus has been forgotten. What Durant gives us is the humanist's view of how Christendom should have reacted, not an historical account of its reaction. The pre-Copernican universe was no smaller than the post-Copernican cosmos. The damage to faith came not from Copernicus, but from the later mechanical models of the universe, which did not expand the universe, but rather eliminated mind from it and narrowed the cosmos to mere matter. The most erroneous aspect of the myth is the assumption that, with Copernicus, modern man turned from a belief in a small world and an absorption with the salvation of his soul to a cosmic view, to a perspective which gave him a vast and open universe. Nothing could be further from the truth. The modern faith has been instead a steady and radical limitation of man's perspective, so that now, instead of an expansive world and life view that encompasses eternity, man's vision is limited to the confines of his existence, to his own mind. This subjectivism was not new. It was common to pagan antiquity and was an important undercurrent of medieval thought. Yeats' study of Giordano Bruno is telling evidence of the hermetic and occultist nature of this undercurrent, which came into power with the Renaissance. It was a birth only in the sense that it was now in existence as a commanding motive in Western civilization and was a rival to Christian faith. The various philosophers of the Renaissance gave exotic forms to this hermetic tradition. In Descartes, this same faith appears, not derived from the occultist tradition, but from a common concept of being as the fountainhead of the new philosophical tradition. Supposedly, the Copernican revolution gave man a cosmic perspective. In reality, with Descartes, modern man began a retreat into the confines of the mind. With René Descartes, 1596 to 1650, philosophy took as its starting point the mind of man as both autonomous and ultimate. Cushman said of Descartes' starting point, "He demanded the same return to an uncorrupted nature for the understanding that Rousseau many years later demanded for the heart." The Aristotelian primacy of the autonomous mind of man and its freedom from the corruption of sin now gained a new eminence and centrality. As Cushman added, for Descartes, reality is within the self, and the next question before him is how to get out of the self. Moreover, for Descartes, the existence of God is an implication of human consciousness. The mind of man is normative. It is neither fallen nor corrupt. Molnar, in an excellent and telling analysis of Hermetic philosophy and epistemology, has shown its coincidence with modern philosophy at a critical point, that is, the equation of knowledge and being. As Molnar points out, the Hermetics equate knowledge and being. We know to the extent that we are, and the fuller, the more total our being, the more complete is also our knowledge. It does not occur to the Hermetic that being may be both unlimited, for example, or rather outside time, and transcendent, and that man is constitutionally limited. He does not recognize being unless he has entirely absorbed it with his intellectual faculties and permeated it with his consciousness to the point of total coincidence. The ideal must then be the equivalence of being and consciousness, the divine man, both being and knowledge. This equivalence describes not only the Hermetics, but, as Molnar shows, modern philosophy as well. In Descartes, there was an obvious formal Catholic faith, but even more clearly, this equation of knowledge and being, Descartes declared. But because in this case I wished to give myself entirely to the search after truth, I thought that it was necessary for me to take an apparently opposite course and to reject as absolutely false everything as to which I could imagine the least ground of doubt, in order to see if afterwards there remained anything in my belief that was entirely certain. Thus, because our senses sometimes deceive us, I wish to suppose that nothing is just as they cause us to imagine it to be, and because there are men who deceive themselves in their reasoning and fall into paralogisms even concerning the simplest matters of geometry, and judging that I was as subject to error as was any other, I rejected as false all the reason formerly accepted by me as demonstrations. And since all the same thoughts and conceptions which we have while awake may also come to us in sleep, without any of them being at that time true, I resolved to assume that everything that ever entered into my mind was no more true than the illusions of my dreams. But immediately afterwards I noticed that whilst I thus wished to think all things false, it was absolutely essential that I, who thought this, should be somewhat, and remarking that this truth, I think, therefore I am, was so certain and so assured that all the most extravagant suppositions brought forward by the sceptics were incapable of shaking it, I came to the conclusion that I could receive it without scruple as the first principle of the philosophy for which I was seeking. The main stream of philosophy had previously centered on God, either as the key problem or question, or, as with St. Anselm, the starting point of all knowledge. In Descartes, philosophy began to eliminate this concern. First of all, Descartes' concern is for knowledge or truth as such, truth as something separate from God, and not necessarily related to God. Later on, to eliminate his epistemological problem of contact between two alien substances, mind and the world of matter, Descartes posited a third factor, God, to ensure their unity and the possibility of knowledge. God is thus a limiting concept, not the ground of truth, but a connecting rod in the epistemological process between mind and the world of matter. Truth was separated from God with far-reaching consequences. Truth was now something in the mind of man, a correspondence between the mind and the world. But even more, the primary truth, the first principle of philosophy, was now, I think, therefore I am. Not even the physical universe enters into this first principle, let alone God. The mind of man reigns alone, autonomous, and supreme in this first principle. Second, while Descartes is a rationalist, his was a quote-unquote scientific rationalism, which looked to mathematics for its guidance and inspiration. Now, mathematics is a science of abstraction. It eliminates the concreteness of life and life itself to concentrate on one factor abstracted from reality, the numerical element. The more nearly abstract the reality approached, the more usable is mathematics. The more concrete and alive the reality, the less tenable mathematics becomes. To illustrate, 2 plus 2 equals 4 is a fact readily conceded as long as it remains abstract. The matter is altered if we ask, are 2 boards of 12 inches by 16 foot equal to 4 boards of 6 inches by 16 foot? If our need is specifically for planks 12 inches wide, they are not the same, they are not equal. If 4 planks can be used equally as well as 2, then they are more or less the same and equal. However, if we turn to life, the equation disappears into meaninglessness. Are any 2 Englishmen and 2 Africans equal to any 4 Australians? Now we are in the world of people. The men can be of varying characters and intelligence, and these factors are not amenable to mathematical description. In brief, the mathematical model, when applied to life, to people, breaks down. Beginning with Descartes, modern philosophy has applied the mathematical model to reality to the extent that it has recognized the outer world and the outcome is an abstraction. The result has been a mechanical view of the universe. Life has been termed an epiphenomenon, not a reality. After Darwin, the mechanical model was replaced with an ostensibly biological model, but it is a biological model born of Descartes and Newton. The universe is a product of the void and has developed by chance and has neither mind nor teleology. But how can teleology be separated from biology? The problem is not solved by calling the teleology in animals instinct. It is merely evaded, because no explanation is given for the meaning of instinct. Like God in Orthodox Christianity, instinct is a presupposition of modern biology, not a known and explicable fact. In John Locke, 1632 to 1704, the retreat of man from an objective universe took a further step inward. In An Essay Concerning Human Understanding, 1690, Locke set forth the basic premises of the Enlightenment. Earlier, An Essay on Toleration, 1667, had appeared, and in 1695, The Reasonableness of Christianity was published. In these, the priority of the state and politics to religion and the church was assumed, and deism was granted a respectable beginning. Although known as the father of British empiricism, Locke's perspective in religion was strictly rationalistic. Thus, first, we find in Locke an assertion of the priority of reason over religion and God, so that what is recognized as true is that which is declared to be rational. Although Locke's conclusions concerning Christianity were conservative and reflected his Puritan parentage, his presuppositions were radical. Reason assumes ultimacy and becomes the judge and arbiter over all reality. An Orthodox Christian, because he believes in the sovereignty and omniscience of God, holds that all reality is rational, in that all reality is a creation of the totally self-conscious and purpose of God. He will recognize that his created reason is not able to comprehend the totality of God and of his creation, but he will at the same time recognize it as comprehensible. In brief, there are no brute facts, no meaningless facts in the universe. All have their meaning, although only God's mind can grasp the totality of his creation. In contrast, the non-Christian thinker denies in principle the total meaning and rationality of the cosmos, because he denies that it is the unified work of the sovereign God. In consequence, he insists on the ultimacy of his own mind and its ability to recognize what element of meaning there may be, and he imposes his own meaning upon reality. Locke set out to prove why the Bible had to be believed and why it was given as a revelation. In prior ages, he pointed out, none, however reasonable at times, followed systematically the laws of reason. As a result, the Bible had been directed to the darkness of men's minds. "'Tis not every writer of morals or compiler of it from others that can thereby be erected into a lawgiver to mankind and a dictator of rules, which are therefore valid because they are found in his books under the authority of this or that philosopher. He that any one will pretend to set up in this kind and have his rules to pass for authentic directions must show that either he builds his doctrine upon principles of reason, self-evident in themselves, and that he deduces all the parts of it from thence by clear and evident demonstration, or must show his commission from heaven that he comes with authority from God to deliver his will and commands to the world. In the former way, nobody that I know before our Saviour's time ever did or went about to give us a morality. 'Tis true there is a law of nature, but who is there that ever did or undertook to give it all entire, as a law, no more no less than what was contained in and had the obligation of that law? Whoever made out all the parts of it, put them together, and showed the world their obligation. Now, finally, the law of nature was being systematically studied, and the implicit assumption which the deist pursued was that now a rational religion and morality were possible, and the old paraphernalia and guises of authority could be dropped for the authority of reason. The age of self-evident truth had arrived. According to Cushman, the deists who sought to free religion and the idea of law from dogma had certain presuppositions. Deism was founded on three principles. 1. The origin of religion may be scientifically investigated. 2. The origin of religion is in the conscience. 3. Positive religions are degenerate forms of natural religion. Deism was quite consistent with the central principle of this period, the self-sufficiency of the individual. Religion, moreover, became a matter of opinion and belief in God a personal option. At the beginning of A Letter Concerning Toleration, Locke spoke with horror of the burning zeal of churchmen, which had led to literal burnings with fire and faggot. This he saw as clearly wrong. It did not occur to him to say also that civil governments, in hanging and beheading men for treason, might also be wrong. For the Enlightenment and modern man, religious order is optional and dispensable. Political order is not. The more religious order has been dropped, as in National Socialist and Marxist countries, the more rigid has the civil order become, and the more active the executioners. Modern man has not abolished intolerance or persecution. He holds with more fervour than the inquisitors that what is worth believing is worth executing and killing for. He has merely shifted his faith from the church to the state. Locke defined the church in A Letter Concerning Toleration as a free and voluntary society. The state was for him the necessary society, and hence a compulsive and coercive society. Religion was now well on the road, together with God, to being reduced to opinion, whereas reason was now allied with the state and politics. As a consequence, although deism worked towards a rational religion, the Enlightenment as a whole preferred the abolition of religion and the establishment of a rational state. As a result also, a major area of activity for philosophic thought was the creation of rational models for civil reform. Monarchy was thus increasingly in disfavour, and ideas for the recreation of civil government in terms of philosopher kings or elite intellectuals began to abound. Reality had to become what the mind willed it to be, not what history, tradition, or property rights had made it. Locke thus wrote his essays concerning the true original extent and end of civil government. This Enlightenment concern was to establish the state of nature and its consequences for man, but the state of nature is at this point still a correlative of right reason. When conflict between the state of nature and reason later appeared, it was reason all along, the implicit ultimate, which triumphed. Nature, the objective universe, was reduced to an aspect of the experience of man's mind. Second, Locke's philosophy, associational in nature, presupposed the mind as a blank white piece of paper that is clean, clear, and impartial, untainted by presuppositions and a priori ideas. Such an assumption was necessary to the ultimacy of the mind. It preserved the integrity of the mind as the impartial arbiter of reality. Right reason had validity because it was untainted. Thus, behind the empiricism of Locke stands a full-fledged rationalism. Empiricism is the methodology of some forms of rationalism, not a competing philosophy. The quarrel between idealism and empiricism is a methodological quarrel between various forms of rationalism. For Locke, the mind is free. It begins without prejudice and without any claims against it. Third, Locke's epistemology has the Cartesian background of dualism, the dualism of mind and matter. This dualism is one that all modern thought struggles with and attempts to overcome. It is important to recognize the meaning of this problem. It is true that it is inherited from Greek philosophy, but why did this problem bedevil Greek and Oriental philosophies, and why does it continue to trouble modern thought as well? The problem comes from the fact that if something is ultimate in the universe, that is, whatever is the starting point and presupposition of a faith or a philosophy, then all else is derivative and or secondary, and a dualism results. In biblical faith, this dichotomy is between creator and creation or creature. Where God is denied, another dichotomy results. In modern thoughts, as much as in ancient philosophy, this dichotomy is between the autonomous and the ultimate mind of man and the universe. In some forms, the universe is reduced to an illusion, and only the mind of man exists, soon itself to become nothingness. In other forms, as in the West after Kant, the dichotomy is resolved by absorbing the universe into the mind and/or experience of man. Thus, while modern philosophy is subjective and is a progressively intensive retreat into the autonomous mind of man, the purpose of this retreat is the conquest of the world by means of the supposed Archimedean point of lever, the mind of man. The unquestioned reality is the mind of man. The problematical reality and/or illusion is the material universe and also God. Locke hoped to tie the mind to the universe by means of association, the association of sensations of the outer world with the mind, an untainted and pure mind which passively receives sense impressions of outer reality. Problems immediately arose with regard to the validity of the report of sense impressions. Bishop George Berkeley, 1685 to 1753, solved the problem by reducing Descartes' trichotomy of mind, matter, and God to a dichotomy of mind and God. In A Treatise Concerning the Principles of Human Knowledge, Introduction 3, Berkeley declared that neither our thoughts nor passions nor ideas formed by the imagination exist without the mind is what everybody will allow. And it seems no less evident that the various sensations or ideas imprinted on the sense, however blended or combined together, that is, whatever objects they compose, cannot exist otherwise than in a mind perceiving them. I think an intuitive knowledge may be obtained of this by anyone that shall attend to what is meant by the term exist when applied to sensible things. The table I write on, I say, exists, that is, I see and feel it. And if I were out of my study, I should say it existed, meaning thereby that if I was in my study, I might perceive it, or that some other spirit actually does perceive it. There was an odour, that is, it was smelled. There was a sound, that is to say, it was heard, a colour or figure, and it was perceived by sight or touch. That is all that I can understand by these and the like expressions. For, as to what is said of the absolute existence of unthinking things without any relation to their being perceived, that seems perfectly unintelligible. Their esse is percepi, nor is it possible that they should have any existence out of the minds or thinking things which perceive them. To be is to be perceived, or more accurately, to be is to be perceived by the autonomous mind of man. The perceptions come from God, so that two substances alone exist, God and man. God sends the ideas to man's mind, so that the entire sensible universe is an orderly perception, existed by God. As Berkeley declared, the ideas imprinted on the senses by the author of nature are called real things, and those excited in the imagination being less regular, vivid, and constant, are more properly termed ideas or images of things which they copy and represent. But then our sensations, be they never so vivid and distinct, are nevertheless ideas, that is, they exist in the mind or are perceived by it, as truly as the ideas of its own framing. The ideas of the sense are allowed to have more reality in them, that is, to be more strong, orderly, and coherent than the creatures of the mind. But this is no argument that they exist without the mind. For Berkeley, God was a sufficient explanation for the natural order. The natural order is simply a vast complex of ideas which are excited in us by God, and it has no being in itself. The proof of the existence of God for Berkeley was precisely this vast complex of sensations and ideas which we call the universe. Everything we see, hear, feel, or anywise perceive by sense being a sign or effect of the power of God. It follows that, quote, we do at all times and in all places perceive manifest tokens of the divinity, end quote. Thus, quote, "It is therefore plain that nothing can be more evident to anyone that is capable of the least reflection that the existence of God, or a spirit who is intimately present in our minds, producing in them all that variety of ideas or sensations which continually affect us, on whom we have an absolute and entire dependence, in short, in whom we live and move and have our being, that the discovery of this great truth which lies so near and obvious to the mind should be attained to by the reason of so very few, is a sad instance of the stupidity and inattention of men, who, though they are surrounded with such clear manifestations of the deity, are yet so little affected by them that they seem as it were blinded with excess of light." Unfortunately for Berkeley, Occam's razor soon went to work in his thesis. That is, the logical implications were followed to reduce man to his mind. If to be is to be perceived by the mind of man, then what being does Berkeley's God have? Has autonomous man perceived God? Is God an object in sense impressions? It clearly followed that David Hume, 1711 to 1776, was able to eliminate both God and the universe. Man has no direct experience of either. All man has are sense impressions, or ideas about sense impressions, and thus all that can be said to exist is the mind of man. Immanuel Kant, 1724 to 1804, tried to rescue knowledge by restoring Descartes' trichotomy on a new basis: the subjective mind of man, phenomena, and things in themselves. The realm of knowledge is phenomena, but reality, things in themselves, is not knowable. We assume the existence of things in themselves, whether of God or of our own subjective states of mind, and the phenomena which appear in our subjective states are an aspect of our experience. One result of this was the radical separation of faith and reason. What the naive experience of man had regarded as the real world, the sovereign creator thereof now became the realm of faith, and was thus inaccessible to reason. Again, what naive experience had previously regarded as a hindrance to valid knowledge, namely the subjective states of man's mind, now became the area of reason, knowledge, and science. The inability of most people to grasp this violation of naive experience is a reason for their failure to recognize the full, radical import of modern philosophy. Hume saw the world and the God of naive experience as projections of man's mind. Berkeley had seen the material world as a creation of ideas excited in our minds by God. Hume and Kant, in effect, reversed this concept, and Schopenhauer called the world our will and idea. In his Natural History of Religion, Hume traced the evolution of religion and theology in terms of this projection. There is an universal tendency among mankind to conceive all things like themselves and to transfer to every object those qualities with which they are familiarly acquainted, and of which they are intimately conscious. The unknown causes which continually employ their thought, appearing always in the same aspect, are all apprehended to be of the same kind or species, nor is it long before we ascribe to them thought and reason and passion, and sometimes even the limbs and figures of men, in order to bring them nearer to a resemblance with ourselves. Life, order, meaning, and objective reality were being withdrawn from the world outside of man. The only truly knowable world was in the confines of man's mind.